The blizzard hit Wyoming territory so hard that Zachary Sutton thought she might die before she reached any kind of shelter. And when the faint glow of lamplight finally appeared through the white curtain of snow, she stumbled toward it with the last strength her frozen limbs could muster. She had been traveling for 3 days from Cheyenne, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and a heart so broken she wondered if it would ever beat properly again. The stagecoach had overturned 20 miles back when the horses panicked in the sudden whiteout. The driver was dead, his neck snapped in the crash. The other passengers, a merchant and his wife, had insisted on trying to walk back to the last town they had passed through. Zachary had disagreed, knowing they had come farther than they thought, that shelter lay ahead if they could just push forward. But they would not listen, and she had been too tired to argue any more. So they split up, each group believing they were making the right choice, each hoping they would survive to tell about it. Now, in late February of 1876, Zachary found herself at her rough-hewn door, her knuckles so numb she could barely make them form a fist to knock. She tried once, weakly, and the sound was lost in the howling wind. Tears froze on her cheeks, tears born of exhaustion and fear and the deep, aching loneliness that had driven her from her home in the first place. She raised her hand again, managed a slightly stronger knock, and then her legs simply gave out. She crumpled against the door, her shoulder hitting the wood, and she began to cry in earnest, great heaving sobs that shook her thin frame. The door opened inward so suddenly that she nearly fell across the threshold. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor, and she found herself being lifted as though she weighed nothing at all. Through the blur of her tears and the snow caked on her eyelashes, she could make out only impressions. Broad shoulders, the smell of wood smoke and coffee, warmth that seemed to radiate like a promise. "Lord, have mercy," a deep voice said, and it was kind, genuinely concerned. "You are about frozen solid. Come on, let us get you inside properly." Zachary wanted to speak, to explain, to thank him, but her teeth were chattering so violently she could not form words. The cowboy, for that is what he surely was based on the spurs she heard jingling, and the worn leather vest she glimpsed, carried her to a chair near the fire and set her down gently. He moved with swift efficiency, throwing 2 more logs onto the flames, then turning to grab blankets from a chest against the wall. "My name is Bennett Atwood," he said, as he wrapped the first blanket around her shoulders. "This is my ranch, about 15 miles south of Wheatland. You are safe here. Can you tell me your name?" Zachary," she managed through her chattering teeth. "Zachary Sutton." "Zachary," he repeated, and she liked the way he said it, without the mockery she usually heard when people learned her masculine name. Her mother had wanted a boy and had named her accordingly, never bothering to change it even when it became clear she would have no other children. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes before you catch your death. I will turn my back, and you change into these." He handed her a flannel shirt and a pair of long underwear, both clearly his own and far too large for her, but they were dry and warm from sitting near the fire. "Can you manage it?" she nodded, though she was not entirely certain she could. Her fingers felt like blocks of wood. But Bennett turned away as promised, busying himself at the stove, and Zachary fumbled with the buttons of her traveling dress. It was a slow, painful process, but eventually she managed to peel off the frozen layers and pull on his clothes. The shirt hung to her knees, and she had to roll the sleeves up several times, but the warmth of the fabric against her skin was the most wonderful thing she had felt in days. "Done," she whispered, and he turned back around. His face, now that she could see it properly in the firelight, was handsome in a weathered way, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. His expression was serious, concerned, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She guessed he was perhaps 30 years old, maybe a few years older, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw shadowed with several days of beard growth. "Your feet," he said, kneeling in front of her. "Let me see them." She hesitated, suddenly embarrassed, but he was already carefully removing her boots. They were good boots, the best her small savings had been able to afford, but they had not been enough against the storm. Her stockings were soaked through, and when he peeled them off, her feet were an alarming shade of white and purple. "This might hurt," he warned, and then he began to rub her feet between his large, calloused hands. He was right. It did hurt. As the circulation began to return, it felt like 1,000 needles stabbing into her skin, and she gasped, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know," Bennett said quietly. "I know it hurts, but we have to warm you up slowly. If we do it too fast, it can cause damage. Just breathe through it." She tried to focus on his face instead of the pain, on the surprising gentleness of his touch. This was a man who worked with his hands, whose life was hard physical labor, yet he handled her frozen feet as though they were made of glass. There was something deeply comforting about his competence, the way he knew exactly what to do, and gradually her tears slowed and then stopped. "That is better," he said after several minutes. "The color is coming back. You might lose a toenail or two, but I think you will be all right." He wrapped her feet in a soft towel and stood. "Now, you need something hot inside you. I have stew from supper. It is not fancy, but it will fill your belly and warm your insides." "Thank you," Zachary managed, her voice still hoarse from crying and cold. "I do not know what I would have done if I had not found your ranch. I think I might have died out there." "You might have," Bennett agreed, ladling stew into a bowl. "This storm came up fast. I barely got my horses into the barn before it hit. What were you doing out in it?" As she ate the stew, which was simple but delicious, thick with vegetables and chunks of beef, Zachary told him about the stagecoach accident, about the merchant and his wife who had gone back, about her decision to push forward. She did not tell him yet why she had been on that stagecoach in the first place, what she was running from. That story felt too raw, too painful to share with a stranger, no matter how kind he was. Bennett listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his expression grave. "I will ride out when the storm clears and look for the others," he said when she finished. "Though if they went back, they have a longer journey. I hope they found shelter." "So do I," Zachary said, though privately she doubted it. The merchant had been older, his wife soft and unused to hardship. They would have tired quickly, and there had been no buildings between where the stagecoach crashed and the last town they had passed through. But she did not want to think about that now, did not want to imagine them frozen in a snowbank somewhere. She had enough weight on her conscience already. The warmth of the fire and the food in her belly were making her drowsy, her eyelids heavy. Bennett noticed, because of course he did. He seemed to notice everything. "You need rest," he said. "You can have my bed. I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Zachary protested weakly, though the thought of lying down was almost painfully appealing. "You can and you will," Bennett said firmly. "It is through that door. There are extra blankets in the chest if you need them. Go on now before you fall asleep in that chair." She was too tired to argue further. She stood on shaky legs and made her way to the bedroom, which was small and simply furnished with a bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. The bed had a thick quilt and looked impossibly inviting. She climbed under the covers, still wearing Bennett's flannel shirt and long underwear, and was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. She woke once in the night, disoriented, and heard the wind still howling outside. But inside it was warm and safe, and through the door she could see the glow of the fire and make out Bennett's form stretched out on the floor near the hearth, wrapped in blankets. He had given her his bed without a second thought, had cared for her as though it were the most natural thing in the world, and something in her chest tightened at the kindness of it. She had not expected kindness, not after everything. When she woke again, pale winter sunlight was streaming through the small window, and the wind had stopped. For a moment she could not remember where she was, but then it all came back. The storm, the long walk, the cowboy who had taken her in. She could hear sounds from the main room, the clank of metal on metal, the smell of coffee and bacon. Zachary climbed out of bed and padded to the door on bare feet. Bennett was at the stove, cooking breakfast, and he looked up when he heard her. "Morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she said, and it was true. She was still exhausted, still sore all over, but the desperate cold and fear had faded. "Thank you for everything. You saved my life." He shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "I do not think that is true," Zachary said quietly, "but I am grateful nonetheless." They ate breakfast together, a simple meal of bacon, eggs, and biscuits that Bennett had baked himself. Zachary found herself studying him as they ate, noting the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the strength in his hands, the quiet competence with which he moved around the small cabin. There was something deeply appealing about him, something that went beyond his good looks. He had a solidity to him, a sense of being completely at home in his own skin, that she found restful after a lifetime of uncertainty. "I should check on the stock," Bennett said when they finished eating. "The storm will have been hard on them. You are welcome to stay as long as you need. The main road will not be passable for at least a day or two anyway." "May I come with you?" Zachary asked impulsively. "I have been cooped up in stage coaches and hotels for days. I would like to see the ranch." Bennett looked surprised but pleased. "If you are feeling up to it." "You will need warmer clothes, though. Those are not going to cut it." He eyed his own shirt and long underwear, which she was still wearing. "I think I have an old coat that might fit you and some spare trousers. They will be too big, but we can make do." He found her clothes that were indeed several sizes too large, but with a belt cinched tight around her waist and the trouser legs rolled up. They worked well enough. The coat was warm wool, lined with sheepskin, and she felt properly insulated for the first time since leaving Cheyenne. Bennett found her a pair of thick socks and some boots that had belonged to a ranch hand who left 2 seasons ago. Outside, the world was transformed. Snow covered everything in a thick blanket, sparkling in the sunlight, and the sky was a bright, hard blue. It was beautiful and treacherous at once. The temperature had dropped further overnight, and Zachary's breath plumed white in the air. Bennett's ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a barn, a small bunkhouse that looked empty, a chicken coop, and several corrals. He led her to the barn first, and she helped him feed and water the horses. There were 6 of them, sturdy working animals with thick winter coats. They nickered softly as Bennett moved among them, and Zachary could see the affection in the way he handled them, the care he took. "I run cattle," he explained as they worked. "About 200 head, though I lost some last winter. This land is good for grazing, and there is water from the creek that runs through the north pasture. I have been here 5 years now, built this place up from nothing." "You did all this yourself?" Zachary asked, impressed. "Mostly. I had helped the first couple years, hired hands, but they moved on. Now it is just me most of the time. I hire extra men for roundup and branding, but otherwise I manage alone." He paused, looking out at the snow-covered land. "It is a lot of work, but it is mine. That matters to me." She understood that, the need to have something of your own, to build a life on your own terms. It was part of what had driven her to leave Cheyenne, though her reasons were tangled up with much darker things. They spent the morning working together, and Zachary found she enjoyed the physical labor, the straightforward simplicity of it. Bennett showed her how to break the ice on the water troughs, how to scatter feed for the chickens, which eyed her with deep suspicion before pecking at the grain. They checked on the cattle, who had sheltered in a stand of trees and seemed to have weathered the storm well enough. By the time they returned to the cabin for lunch, Zachary was tired but in a good way, her muscles pleasantly achy, her cheeks stinging from the cold. Bennett made sandwiches from leftover bacon and fresh bread, and they ate in companionable silence. "You are good with the animals," Bennett observed. "Have you worked on a ranch before?" "No," Zachary admitted. "I grew up in Philadelphia. We had no animals except for a cat. But my father died when I was 12, and my mother and I had to make do. We took in laundry, and I learned to work hard. This is different, but not so different. What brought you out west?" Bennett asked, and his tone was casual, but Zachary sensed he had been wanting to ask this question since she arrived. She looked down at her plate, her appetite suddenly gone. She knew she would have to tell him eventually. She could not stay here indefinitely without explaining herself, and part of her wanted to tell him, to share the burden she had been carrying alone. "I came to Cheyenne 6 months ago to work as a seamstress," she said slowly. "There was a shop that needed someone with experience, and I thought it would be a good opportunity. My mother had died the year before, and there was nothing keeping me in Philadelphia." She paused, gathering her courage. The shop was owned by a man named Gerald Stone. He was older, maybe 40, and he seemed kind at first. He offered me good wages, a room above the shop. It all seemed perfect. Bennett's expression had gone very still, and she could see he understood where this story was going. "He was kind for the first month," Zachary continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "And then he started making comments about how pretty I was, how lonely he was since his wife died. I tried to ignore it to focus on my work, but he got bolder. He would stand too close, touch my arm, my shoulder. One night about 2 weeks ago he came to my room. He was drunk and he tried to force himself on me." "Did he hurt you?" Bennett asked, and his voice was tight with anger, but it was not directed at her. "I fought him," Zachary said. "I had scissors from my sewing kit, and I cut his face. He stumbled back and I ran. I grabbed what I could and ran out into the night. I had nowhere to go, but there was a church a few streets away, and the pastor and his wife took me in. They let me stay there until I could earn enough money for a stage coach ticket. I wanted to get as far from Cheyenne as I could." "Where were you headed?" Bennett asked gently. "I do not know," Zachary admitted. "I bought a ticket to Laramie because it was far and because I had heard it was a growing town. I thought maybe I could find work there, start over. But then the stage coach crashed, and now I am here." She finally looked up at him, afraid of what she might see in his face. Judgment, perhaps, or disgust, or that particular kind of disbelief that some men showed when women told stories like hers. But Bennett's expression was none of those things. He looked angry, yes, but on her behalf, and there was something else too, something that looked almost like pain. "I am sorry that happened to you," he said. "You did nothing wrong. You know that, right? Nothing that happened was your fault." Zachary felt her throat tighten, tears threatening again. She had not realized how much she needed to hear those words, how much she had been blaming herself for not seeing the danger sooner, for trusting Gerald Stone in the first place. "You are safe here," Bennett continued, "for as long as you need to stay. And when you are ready to move on, I will help you get wherever you want to go. But you do not have to leave if you do not want to. I could use help around the ranch if you are interested. It would not be charity. You would earn your keep and then some." Zachary stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would let me stay, work here, "Why not?" Bennett said. "Like I said, I usually manage alone, but it is hard. There is more work than one person can really handle, especially during calving season, which is coming up. You are a good worker. I can see that already, and you do not shy away from the cold or the labor. If you want to stay, I would be glad to have you." It was an impulsive offer, perhaps, but Zachary could see he meant it. This man who had known her for less than a day was offering her sanctuary employment, a chance to start over. It was more than she had dared to hope for. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like to stay, at least for a while. Thank you, Bennett." He smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face, made him look younger and somehow more approachable. "We will figure out the details as we go," he said. "For now, let us just focus on getting you properly settled." The next few days fell into a natural rhythm. The snow began to melt as the temperature rose slightly, though winter was far from over. Bennett rode out to search for the merchant and his wife, but found no trace of them. It was possible they had made it back to the last town, though Zachary doubted it. More likely they were buried under the snow somewhere, and their bodies would not be found until spring. She said a prayer for them and tried not to dwell on it. She and Bennett worked together each day, tending to the animals, repairing fences damaged by the storm, preparing for the calving season that would begin in a few weeks. Bennett was a patient teacher, showing her how to do things without making her feel incompetent, and Zachary learned quickly. She had always been good with her hands, and the skills required for ranch work were not so different from the precision needed for sewing. In the evenings, they would return to the cabin, tired and hungry, and take turns cooking dinner. Zachary was the better cook, having learned from her mother, and she introduced Bennett to recipes he had never tried before. He seemed to enjoy having someone to share meals with, and she certainly enjoyed the company. Living alone for so long had made him quiet, but he opened up as the days passed, telling her about his childhood in Missouri, about the war that had taken his father and older brother, about his decision to come west and make a new life. "I wanted land of my own," he explained one evening as they sat by the fire, mugs of coffee in their hands. "I wanted to build something that would last, that I could be proud of. My father was a tenant farmer, and we never had anything that was really ours. I swore I would change that." "You have," Zachary said. "This ranch, everything you have built, it is impressive." "It is a start," Bennett said, "but there is more I want to do. I want to expand the herd, build a bigger barn, maybe add another room onto the cabin." He glanced at her, then looked away quickly. "It would be nice to have a family someday, someone to build this all for." There was something in his tone, a wistfulness that made Zachary's heart ache. She wondered if he was lonely out here, if the solitude that seemed so appealing from a distance became oppressive in reality. She was beginning to understand why he had been so welcoming to her, why he had offered her work without hesitation. He needed the company as much as she needed the refuge. "I am sure you will have that someday," she said softly. "You are a good man, Bennett. Any woman would be lucky to build a life with you." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. There was an intensity in his gaze, a warmth that went beyond simple friendship, and she felt an answering warmth rise in her own chest. But then he looked away, clearing his throat, and the moment passed. "We should get some sleep," he said, standing abruptly. "Tomorrow we need to check the fence line on the south pasture. It is a long ride." Zachary nodded, disappointed but not surprised. It was too soon for anything more than this tentative friendship they were building. She had been through too much, was still too raw, and Bennett was too much of a gentleman to take advantage of that. But she had felt the spark between them, the potential for something deeper, and she knew he had felt it too. She had been sleeping in Bennett's bed since that first night, while he continued to sleep by the fire. She had protested repeatedly, but he would not hear of it. "I have slept in worse places," he said whenever she brought it up. "Besides, I like being near the fire. It is warmer." This was obviously not true, but Zachary eventually stopped arguing. She appreciated the gesture, the respect for her privacy and her comfort. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, the rhythm of ranch life continued. The calving season began, and suddenly, there was no time for anything but work. Cows gave birth at all hours, and Bennett taught Zachary how to assist when there were complications, how to make sure the newborn calves were nursing properly, how to watch for signs of illness. It was exhausting, relentless work, but Zachary threw herself into it with determination. She wanted to prove herself useful, to show Bennett that his faith in her was justified. One night, about 6 weeks after her arrival, they were in the barn with a cow who was having a difficult labor. The calf was breech, and Bennett was trying to turn it, his arm deep inside the laboring cow, his face tight with concentration. Zachary held the lantern and murmured soothing words to the cow, who was bellowing in distress. "I almost have it," Bennett said through gritted teeth. "There. Yes. Come on, Mama, push." The calf slid out in a rush of fluid, and Bennett caught it, quickly clearing its nose and mouth. For a terrifying moment it did not move, and Zachary thought it was dead. But then it shuddered, coughed, and took a gasping breath. The cow turned her head, lowing softly, and began to lick her baby clean. Bennett sat back on his heels, covered in blood and mucus, and grinned at Zachary. "We did it." "You did it," Zachary corrected, setting down the lantern. "I just held the light." "You did more than that," Bennett said. "You kept her calm. That matters." He stood, wincing slightly, and stretched his back. "I am getting too old for this." "You are not old," Zachary said, laughing. She was giddy with relief and exhaustion and the simple joy of having saved a life. Without thinking, she threw her arms around Bennett, hugging him tightly. "We make a good team." He stiffened for a moment, surprised, but then his arms came around her, and he hugged her back. He was warm and solid, and Zachary became suddenly aware of how close they were, of the way her body fit against his. She pulled back slightly, meaning to step away, but he did not let her go. Instead, he looked down at her, his dark eyes searching her face, and she saw her own longing reflected there. "Zachary," he said, his voice rough, "I do not want to take advantage. You have been through so much, and I do not want you to feel obligated just because I gave you a place to stay." "I do not feel obligated," Zachary said, her heart pounding. "Bennett, I care about you. These past weeks, working with you, talking with you, I have been happier than I have been in a long time. Maybe ever. You make me feel safe. You make me feel valued, and I think you feel the same way about me." "I do," Bennett admitted. "Lord help me, I do. From the moment you stumbled into my cabin, I have been drawn to you, but I did not want to rush you, did not want to scare you off." "You could not scare me off," Zachary said. "Not after everything. I trust you, Bennett. I trust you more than I have trusted anyone in a very long time." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the roughness of his calloused palms, and bent his head to kiss her. It was a sweet kiss, tentative at first, as though he was afraid she might change her mind. But Zachary kissed him back, rising on her toes to press closer, and after a moment the kiss deepened, became something more urgent, more passionate. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bennett rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I think I have been since the moment I opened my door and found you there, crying in the snow. You looked so lost, and all I wanted was to fix it, to make everything better." "You did," Zachary whispered. "You have. I am falling in love with you too, Bennett." I did not think I could after what happened, but you have shown me that not all men are like Gerald Stone. You have shown me what kindness looks like, what respect looks like. And I want more of this. I want more of you." They kissed again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. It was a kiss full of promise, of hope, of the future they were beginning to imagine together. When they finally separated, Bennett took her hand and led her out of the barn, back toward the cabin. The stars were bright overhead, and the air smelled of spring, of new beginnings. Over the next few weeks, their relationship blossomed. They were careful still, mindful of Zachary's past trauma, but the affection between them was undeniable. Bennett courted her properly, as much as one could court someone while living in a remote ranch and working from dawn to dusk. He picked wildflowers for her when they appeared in the meadows. He saved the best cuts of meat for her at dinner. He made her laugh with stories of his early days on the ranch, the mistakes he had made, the lessons he had learned. Zachary, for her part, found herself opening up in ways she had not expected. She told Bennett about her childhood, about her distant mother who had never quite forgiven her for not being a boy, about her father whom she had adored and whose death had shattered her world. She told him about her dreams, the ones she had almost given up on, to have a home of her own, to feel truly safe, to be loved for who she was. "You have a home here," Bennett said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. "For as long as you want it, and you are loved, Zachary." "I love you. I do not need to wait any longer to say it. I love you, and I want you to stay, not as a hired hand but as my wife, if you will have me." Zachary turned to him, her eyes wide. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am," Bennett said. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her palm. "I know we have only known each other a few months, and I know you have been through hell. If it is too soon, I understand, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Zachary Sutton. You are strong and brave and kind, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. So yes, I am asking you to marry me. Will you?" Tears sprang to Zachary's eyes, but they were happy tears this time, not the desperate, frightened tears she had cried that first night. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Bennett, I will marry you. I love you too, and I cannot imagine my life without you now." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Zachary felt as though her heart might burst with joy. After everything she had been through, after all the pain and fear, she had found this. A good man who loved her, a home where she belonged, a future bright with possibility. They were married a month later in Wheatland, in a small ceremony at the town's only church. The pastor who performed the ceremony was a jolly man named Reverend Cooper, who seemed delighted to be officiating at a wedding rather than a funeral for a change. Bennett wore his best suit, which was slightly too tight across the shoulders and smelled faintly of mothballs, but Zachary thought he looked incredibly handsome. She wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Bennett had bought for her in town, a simple design in pale blue that brought out her eyes. There were no guests except for a few townsfolk who had befriended Bennett over the years. The owner of the general store, the blacksmith and his wife, a neighboring rancher named Tom Hardy who helped Bennett during Roundup. They were good people, and they welcomed Zachary warmly, telling her how glad they were that Bennett had finally found someone. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at the town's only hotel, with cake and lemonade and a fiddler who played cheerful tunes. Zachary danced with Bennett, feeling light and free in a way she had never felt before. This was her wedding day, and she was marrying a man she loved, a man who loved her in return. The darkness of her past felt very far away. That night, they returned to the ranch as husband and wife. Bennett carried her over the threshold, which made them both laugh, and then he set her down gently and kissed her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Atwood," he said, and Zachary's heart swelled. "Mrs. Atwood," she repeated, trying out the name. "I like the sound of that." Their wedding night was tender and sweet. Everything Zachary had hoped it would be, and nothing like the violence she had feared. Bennett was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and afterward they lay tangled together in the bed that was now theirs to share, talking quietly until they fell asleep. The months that followed were among the happiest of Zachary's life. She threw herself into making the cabin feel like a true home, sewing curtains for the windows, planting a garden near the house, learning to cook the foods Bennett loved. She continued to work alongside him on the ranch, and he continued to appreciate her help, never taking her labor for granted. They talked about the future often, about the improvements they wanted to make to the ranch, about the possibility of expanding the herd. And they talked about children, tentatively at first, because Zachary was nervous about becoming a mother after her own difficult relationship with her mother. But Bennett reassured her, telling her he had no doubt she would be wonderful, that she had so much love to give. "We do not have to rush," he said. "We have time. Let us just enjoy being married for a while, getting used to each other." But nature had other plans. By late summer, Zachary realized she had missed her monthly courses, and a few weeks later she began to feel queasy in the mornings. She suspected what it meant but waited to be sure before telling Bennett. When she was certain, she told him one evening at dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "I am pregnant," she said simply. "We are going to have a baby." Bennett stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and Zachary felt a flicker of fear. But then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he stood so abruptly his chair fell over. He crossed to her side of the table in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Zachary, that is the most wonderful news. We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Zachary asked, though the answer was obvious. "Happy? I am over the moon," Bennett said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "I cannot believe it. A baby, our baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Zachary was sick for the first 3 months, able to keep down only dry bread and weak tea. Bennett fretted over her constantly, trying to make her comfortable, taking on extra chores so she could rest. By the 2nd trimester, the sickness eased, and Zachary began to feel more like herself. Her belly grew, and she felt the baby move for the first time on a crisp October day. She grabbed Bennett's hand and placed it on her stomach so he could feel it too, and the wonder on his face was something she would never forget. Winter came again, and Zachary found herself thinking about that first night, about stumbling through the blizzard to Bennett's door. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than a year. She had been so lost then, so broken, and now she was whole. She had a husband who adored her, a home she loved, and a baby on the way. It was more than she had ever dared to dream. The baby came in early March on a day when the snow was falling softly outside. Zachary's labor started in the morning, and by afternoon, the contractions were coming fast and hard. Bennett had ridden to Wheatland the day before to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Brennan, who had delivered half the babies in the county. She arrived just in time, bustling into the cabin with her bag of supplies and a no-nonsense attitude that Zachary found reassuring. "First babies take their time," Mrs. Brennan announced. "But not always. Let us see where we are." The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when Zachary thought she could not go on, that it was too much. But Bennett stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement. And when the baby finally arrived, wailing loudly, Mrs. Brennan placed the baby in Zachary's arms and said, "You have a son." a healthy, strong son. Zachary looked down at the tiny, red-faced baby and felt a wave of love so intense it took her breath away. He was perfect, with a thatch of dark hair and Bennett's nose. She looked up at her husband, who was staring at their son with tears streaming down his face. "He is beautiful," Bennett said hoarsely. "You did so well, Zachary. I am so proud of you. What should we name him?" Zachary asked, stroking the baby's soft cheek. They had discussed names endlessly over the past few months, never quite settling on one. But now, looking at their son, Bennett said, "What about Joseph, after my father, Joseph Atwood?" "Joseph," Zachary repeated. "I love it. Hello, Joseph." Welcome to the world. Mrs. Brennan stayed for 2 days, making sure Zachary recovered well and that the baby was nursing properly. She taught Zachary how to care for Joseph, how to change him and swaddle him and soothe him when he cried. Bennett watched it all with a mixture of fascination and terror, clearly afraid he would do something wrong. "You will not break him," Mrs. Brennan said with a laugh. "Babies are tougher than they look. Just support his head and be gentle and you will be fine." After Mrs. Brennan left, the three of them settled into a new routine. Zachary was exhausted in a way she had never been before, the constant feeding and waking through the night taking their toll. But she was also happier than she had ever been. Joseph was a good baby, fussy sometimes but generally content, and watching Bennett with him was a joy. Her husband was a natural father, patient and tender, singing lullabies in his rough voice and walking the floor with Joseph when he would not sleep. Spring turned to summer, and Joseph grew quickly, his dark eyes taking in the world with solemn curiosity. Zachary returned to helping with the ranch work as much as she could, though now she often had Joseph strapped to her back in a sling Bennett had fashioned for her. The baby seemed to enjoy the motion, often falling asleep as Zachary moved around the ranch. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Joseph asleep in Zachary's arms, Bennett said, "I was thinking we should add that room onto the cabin. Joseph will need his own space eventually, and maybe there will be more children someday." "More children," Zachary said, raising an eyebrow. "Let me recover from this one first," Bennett laughed. "Fair enough. But someday, maybe." "Someday," Zachary agreed. "I would like that. A brother or sister for Joseph. We could build a bigger house eventually," Bennett said, warming to the idea. "With a real parlor and a dining room, maybe even a second story. The ranch is doing well. We could afford it in a few years." Zachary leaned against his shoulder, content. "I do not need a big house," she said. "I just need this. You and Joseph and this life we have built. That is enough for me." "You deserve more than enough," Bennett said, putting his arm around her. "You deserve everything good in this world, Zachary. And I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and love. Joseph grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and the animals as much as his parents did. When he was 3, Zachary gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Bennett's mother. She was tiny and fierce from the start, with her mother's determination and her father's stubbornness. Bennett did build that addition onto the cabin. And then, as the ranch continued to prosper, he built a new house altogether, larger and more comfortable, with glass windows and wood floors and a parlor where Zachary could entertain the friends they had made in Wheatland. It was a far cry from the rough cabin where their life together had begun, but they kept the original building, using it as a storage shed, and sometimes, when they wanted to remember, sitting inside and talking about that first night when a blizzard had brought Zachary to Bennett's door. When Joseph was 10 and Margaret was 7, they had one more child, another boy they named Samuel. By then, Joseph was already helping with the ranch work in earnest, riding out with his father to check on the cattle, learning the business from the ground up. Margaret was more interested in books and learning, and Zachary taught her to read and write, hoping they could send her to school in Cheyenne someday. The years were not without their challenges. There were droughts and hard winters, cattle lost to disease and predators, the constant worry about money and the future. But Bennett and Zachary faced it all together, their bond only growing stronger with each passing year. They had built something real and lasting, a legacy for their children and their children's children. One evening, when Zachary was 40 years old and Bennett was 45, they sat together on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to cultivate. Joseph was off at a neighboring ranch, courting a girl he hoped to marry. Margaret was inside, reading by lamplight. Samuel was in bed, exhausted from a day of play. "You ever think about that night?" Bennett asked. "The night you arrived, I think about it often," Zachary said. "I was so scared then, so certain my life was over. And instead, it was just beginning. You gave me everything, Bennett. A home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God for you every day." "You have it backwards," Bennett said, taking her hand. "You were the one who gave me everything. Before you, this ranch was just work, just a way to pass the time. But you turned it into a home. You gave me a family, a purpose. You made me happier than I ever thought possible. That blizzard brought you to my door, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me." Zachary leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. "We have had a good life," she said softly. "We have," Bennett agreed, "and we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us still. Years to watch our children grow and start families of their own. Years to keep building this ranch. Years to love each other. I look forward to every single one of them." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, surrounded by the land they had tamed and the life they had built. Inside the house, their children slept safely, unaware of the sacrifices their parents had made, the hardships they had endured. But that was as it should be. Zachary and Bennett had created a world where their children could grow up feeling secure and loved. And that was the greatest achievement of all. Years later, when Joseph brought his new wife home to meet them, Zachary watched her son with pride. He was a good man, kind and hardworking like his father, and his bride was a sweet girl who clearly adored him. They were married at the same church where Zachary and Bennett had wed, and the celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with neighbors and friends coming from miles around. Margaret eventually did go to school in Cheyenne, and she became a teacher, opening a small school in Wheatland where she taught children to read and write and do their sums. She married a doctor, a quiet man who shared her love of learning, and they gave Zachary and Bennett their first grandchildren, twin girls who looked just like their mother. Samuel stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operations as Bennett grew older. He was a natural rancher with an instinct for the land and the animals, and under his management, the ranch continued to thrive. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Bennett and Zachary renewed their vows in a small ceremony at the house, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Bennett was grayer now, his face more lined, but to Zachary, he was as handsome as the day she met him. She was older too, her dark hair streaked with silver, her hands rough from years of work, but Bennett looked at her as though she was the most beautiful woman in the world. 30 years, he said during the ceremony, holding both her hands in his. 30 years since you came into my life, and I have not regretted a single day. You are my partner, my love, my best friend. I promise to love you for all the days I have left, and to meet you on the other side when those days are done. Zachary felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. "You saved my life," she said. "And then you gave me a life worth living. I love you, Bennett Atwood. I have loved you from almost the beginning, and I will love you until the end of time." They kissed, and their children cheered, and the grandchildren clapped their hands, not fully understanding but caught up in the joy of the moment. There was food and music and dancing, and it was a celebration not just of their marriage but of everything they had built together. Bennett lived to see his 75th birthday, still sharp-minded and capable despite his aging body. He died peacefully in his sleep one autumn night, with Zachary beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart broke, she found comfort in knowing they had had 35 years together, 35 years of love and partnership and joy. Zachary lived another 8 years after Bennett's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the night she arrived at his door in a blizzard, about how he had dried her tears and warmed her soul. She told them about the ranch in its early days, about the hard work and the struggles and the triumphs. She wanted them to understand where they came from, the legacy they carried. When Zachary died at the age of 76, she was buried beside Bennett on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their children erected a simple stone marker that read, "Bennett and Zachary Atwood, beloved parents and grandparents, together in life, together in eternity." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, growing and changing but always remaining at its core what Bennett and Zachary had made it. A home built on love and hard work and the belief that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found. And every winter, when the snow fell and the wind howled, the Atwood descendants would remember the story of how it all began, with a blizzard that brought a desperate woman to a lonely cowboy's door, and how that chance meeting had changed everything. The love between Bennett and Zachary became a legend in their family, a touchstone that future generations would point to when they needed to believe in the power of love and second chances. Their great-great-grandchildren would walk the land they had worked, live in houses built on the foundation they had laid, and carry forward the values they had instilled: kindness, perseverance, faith in each other. On cold winter nights, when families gathered around fires in houses that had not yet been built when Bennett and Zachary first met, the story would be told again. How the blizzard of 1876 had brought a broken young woman to the door of a lonely cowboy. How he had dried her tears and warmed her not just with fire and food but with genuine compassion. How that compassion had grown into friendship, and friendship into love, and love into a family that would endure for generations. It was a story of survival and resilience, of two people who had found each other in the harshest of circumstances and had chosen to build a life together. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes, that tragedy can be transformed into triumph, that love can bloom even in the coldest winters. The ranch itself stood as a monument to their love. Every building and fence posed a testament to their shared vision. The creek where they had spent countless evenings watching the sunset still flowed through the north pasture. The barn where they had saved that breech calf, where they had first kissed, still stood strong. The hill where they were buried together offered a view of everything they had created, stretching out in all directions. And on certain nights, when the wind blew just right, and the snow fell in thick curtains like it had that February night so long ago, people said you could almost see them. A young woman stumbling through the storm toward a light in the distance, a young man opening his door to find her there, frozen and crying and desperate. You could almost hear him say those first words, "Lord, have mercy," and feel the warmth of the fire he built to save her life. The story of Bennett and Zachary Atwood was more than just a family history. It was a testament to the power of human kindness, to the way one moment of compassion can echo through time, creating ripples that touch generations yet unborn. It was proof that love could survive anything, even the harshest Wyoming winter, even the darkest human cruelty, even death itself. For in the end, what is love but the willingness to open your door to someone in need, to dry their tears, to warm their soul? What is love but the choice to see someone at their lowest point and offer them not judgment but shelter? What is love but two people building something together that will outlast them both? Bennett Atwood had been a simple cowboy, a man who worked the land and asked for nothing more than a roof over his head and the satisfaction of a job well done. Zachary Sutton had been a woman running from trauma, certain that her life was over before it had truly begun. Neither of them had been looking for love that night. Neither of them had expected to find it. But the blizzard had brought them together, and they had made a choice, both of them, to take a chance on each other. Bennett had chosen to see past Zachary's tears and trauma to the strong, capable woman beneath. Zachary had chosen to trust again, to believe that not all men were like the one who had hurt her, to open her heart despite her fear. Those choices had changed everything. They had created a love story that would be remembered and retold, that would inspire and comfort, that would remind people that even in the darkest nights, dawn eventually comes. They had built not just a ranch but a legacy, not just a family but a dynasty, not just a life but a legend. And so the story ended where it began, with a blizzard and a cowboy and a woman crying at his door. But now the tears were not tears of despair but tears of joy, tears of gratitude for a life well lived, for love found and cherished, for a family that would carry on long after they were gone. The blizzard had brought her to his door crying. The cowboy had dried her tears and warmed her soul, and together they had created something that would last forever.